Welcome to the Sunday edition of the Indie Author Method. On the weekends, when you have a little bit more space in your day to spend time with your writing craft, we sit down with another author to discuss their writing and the insight and wisdom they have to share with you. This week, I'm joined by author Kristin Canary, whose newest rom-com, Needing the Next Door Neighbor, the sixth in her California Dreamin' series, released earlier this spring. Kristin, thank you for hanging out with me today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Andrew?
I'm good. Hey, look, I have a confession. I am a big rom-com reader.
Oh, awesome.
I love romance. I'm not your typical target market, but I grew up on like Matthew McConaughey movies and just absolutely adore everything going on in the current rom-com space. How did you get into writing?
Oh, well, I started writing about 12 years ago, and I started in the inspirational fiction market with another pen name. I was traditionally published for 3 books with that, and then in 2021 decided to try my hand at rom-coms and published some indie books, and here we are.
And now this is the 6th in that series. So you've started in 2021, and now you've got 6 in less than 3 years.
Yeah, plus a prequel novella. So
goodness.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride.
Tell us about your writing process then, because it takes a ton of dedication to be able to pump out those kind of numbers.
Yeah, and I have slowed down some for sure. But I use Susan May Warren's story equation to kind of map out a character's journey and, all of the things, the dark moment, the wound that they have, the lie that they believe, that sort of thing, so that I can then implement that into the plot and figure out. So first I know who my characters are, and then I figure out what do they have to go through to experience real character change. And so once I have that kind of solidified, I also use the Enneagram to figure out a writer or like the character's personality and, what they would really do, how they would react to a certain situation to just kind of help me. I use the Enneagram Institute. They have tons of great resources about different personality types. And, so then I can, okay, are they a workaholic? Okay, how would they react to this type of situation? What would be their fear, their lie, that sort of thing. So it kind of helps me create the characters first. And then I take that and kind of brainstorm out a plot to use. And I am a plotter, so I definitely plot ahead of time. Then so when I sit down to write, I kind of know the scene that I am going to be working on and what's going to happen in that scene. Now, I used to stick to that plot like through thick and thin, but now I've realized that, when you don't know the characters quite yet, when you haven't started writing the characters, then you don't know them as well as when you start writing them. So once I do that, then I give myself freedom to change the plot as I go if I feel like, oh, that character actually wouldn't do that in the way that I thought that they would. So yeah, that's kind of my process.
you hit on a couple of things there that we really iterate here in the Indie Author Method. And the first is you plot out your story. Mm-hmm. You have a roadmap of where you want to go. And where your story's going. You don't just sit down and say, let's go. Right. You have a plan. Number 2 is you apply yourself to a process, whether that's, a plotting method like Save the Cat or Romancing the Beat. You apply yourself to a process and product comes out, as opposed to trying to formulate your own ideas into something that may not quite work. I think that's really interesting. Like I said, you're 6 books into this series. How did you get the inspiration for writing the California Dreamin' books?
Well, I visited San Diego in the summer of 2021, and I just thought, wow, this is going to be such a fun place to set a book. I live in Phoenix, and so we've gone to California quite often. I've gotten to San Diego before, but we spent 3 weeks there, my family and I, and it was just really fun to immerse myself in that world and just started dreaming about creating a series here because there's lots of great settings, and I love beach books, beach settings, and so I hadn't really seen a series set in San Diego necessarily. I'm sure there are some, but I hadn't read any. And so I thought that would be just a really fun thing to do. And then I thought, well, I love family books, but I also love the found family trope where it's, friends who decide, even if they've had, not great family in their lives that they create family from friendships. And so I have friends like that. I had a great childhood, thankfully, but I still have friends that I surround myself with that are like family to me, like sisters. And I just wanted to kind of explore that relationship. So.
No, I love that. Who are some of the authors that you are inspired by, or that you started out emulating? I find myself, I grew up on a steady diet of R.L. Stine and Stephen King. So even now, whenever I write, young adult coming of age stories, they still have that flavor to them. Are there any authors like that for you?
Well, I grew up reading a lot of Jane Austen. I loved the classics until I was in college. I really didn't start reading. I mean, when I was younger, I read like Babysitter's Club and stuff like that. That was
right, of course,
that sort of fiction. But when I started reading like more modern day fiction was in college. And at that time I was reading a lot of inspirational romance because that's what I wanted to write exclusively at the time. And then I've since, like you, with the rom-coms, branched out into more general market romance. They're still sweet in nature. So, but yeah, I don't know. Jane Austen, those sort of books. Now I really love, now that I've been reading in this space, I really love Emily Henry. She's got a great, I think like women's fiction has it's kind of where I've come from. And so I've kind of brought that voice into my rom-coms. So still fun and light, but also I like to explore some of the deeper issues that people might also, characters might go through. So I also really like Emma St. Clair in the sweet rom-com genre. Yeah. She's been really great. I read all of her stuff, that sort of thing. So,
it was during the pandemic that I was exploring the current rom-com space and discovering that spectrum of chili pepper spice, where it's like, oh, these are really nice to, oh Lord.
Yes. Yeah. I prefer to stay in the sweet, but no shade to anybody who chooses differently. It's just what I prefer and what I feel comfortable writing. So
I find that really interesting that you were, talking about some of the authors that you have, that you read that inspire you, that maybe try to emulate sometimes. Or I think we all, as writers, find other authors who we can take things from, the way they use words, the way they use dialogue, and introduce that into our own writing. What would you say to an aspiring author who wants to do that, or what would you say to an aspiring author who doesn't know where to start whenever it comes to processing other books or other writers?
Yeah, I would say, so just read widely in your genre. That's obviously something that I think all, writing experts kind of say to do. And think about when you read it, it's hard. It's hard to read once you're a writer for just fun. But if you can read it just for fun, then think about how it made you feel. Especially pick some that have been really popular in your genre, really well, like people are shouting about it from the rooftops, and try to figure out, what is it about this book? Is it the trope? Is it the characters? Is it just the banter? Is it the plot? Is it, is it high level stuff? Is it like just the little details? Try to figure out, and maybe then even take a highlighter to it. I mean, or you can, if you want to use that's fine. Highlight your Kindle. No. Mark up a real book.
There's a certain subsect of readers who will call this sacrilegious, but whenever I read a book, I'm folding pages, I'm making notes, I'm highlighting. Yeah. I see reading as a two-way conversation. So I'm going to process that as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then just take those notes and figure out, what it was that. And, we all want to know what the secret sauce is. And sometimes books that we think aren't very good, obviously, or didn't resonate with us, are very popular. But think about the books that really did resonate with you, because those are the things that you're going to want to put into your writing. Now, of course, you also, as a writer, have to figure out what your voice is. And by copying other people, you're not going to find that. So you do have to write, I say where you're passionate. I know there's so many things out there about creating a business, and you should go with, figure out what sells and whatever. And I think the
right to market.
Right. So it's the intersection of what sells versus where you're passionate is really where you're going to shine. Because if you're trying to write, if I was going to try to write YA fantasy, I enjoy reading that, but I don't think that I would have the headspace for creating like the world building that would, and that would just, I would just get very confused, and then I would probably start to resent writing, that sort of thing. Whereas other people just like love that and eat that up and just, so I think it's just figuring out, the intersection of what you love to write with also what might be selling in the market. If you're going indie, if you're trying to get traditionally published, then it's usually like a 2 or 3 year process. Like you get acquired and then your book doesn't come out for 2 years. So almost like it's not like as important, I don't think, personally, to figure out what sells. Like you want a really good concept that people are going to go, ooh, that's cool. But it's not quite, you're not trying to jump on trends as quickly. So,
right. Kristin, before I let you go, thank you again so much for your time today. Where can our viewers and subscribers find you?
Yeah, so my website, KristinCanary.com. But I'm mostly on Instagram is kind of where I hang out a lot. So that's Instagram.com/KristinCanaryAuthor.
Cool. And your books are available?
Yep, they're available on Amazon. Yep, ebook. The first 3 books in the series are available in audio currently. And the paperback should be available. I just put them into the Ingram system, so they should be available on Barnes & Noble and any other, paperback retailer. So you can request it from your library, that your library buy them, that sort of thing. But Amazon has all of the versions. So
great, fantastic. Before I let you go, there is one more question, and it's this, and it's probably already happened to you because somebody's going to come to you at a book conference or a festival or something, a book signing, and they're going to say to you, Kristin, oh my God, you are my favorite author. I have story ideas. Where do I begin? What is your biggest piece of advice for that aspiring author?
Oh, man. So what I always tell them is to go and just write the book. Like, don't worry about studying all this craft and everything, because I think that people will get in their heads if they're trying to, there's so many methods out there. There's so many things to learn. And I personally am the kind of person that likes to know all the things before I start something. So if you are trying to learn all the things before you start it, you're never going to start it. So I say, just write the story for fun. My first 2 books have never been published. They will never see the light of day probably. And that's okay. Like the first one I wrote in like 4 months, I just had so much fun with it. I was so joyful in writing it. And I think that if I had had all of this like craft stuff in my head, then I might have been like, oh, that's not right. Oh, it's not right. I can't figure it out. But I just wrote it and it's kind of garbage at this point. Like, but that's okay. Like every book is a learning process, and every book you learn something. And I think with that first book, the whole thing that you learn is I can write a book and this is fun. I love this.
Yeah.
So that's
Hemingway,
start.
Hemingway tells us the first draft of anything is crap, right? So whether it's your first book or the first draft of a later book,
right? The
first one's going to be crap, and that's okay. And you can actually revel in that, in that
just
knowledge.
Know that it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just for fun, and you're going to learn from it, and you're going to do better. And I say you can't edit a blank page, so just go for it.
Yeah, fantastic. Kristin, thank you again so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.